everyone. My name is Kenzie Jessup. I am the Director of Graduate Studies for the Gordon Ford College of Business at WKU. I am responsible for recruiting, for student experience, and I'm also the person that you often get to see as the first face once you enter one of our graduate programs. I'm so excited to have you all here this afternoon for another opportunity to join us for Executive Insights. Today we have the amazing Greg Coker, and he's going to be delivering a presentation to you all today. As we always do with our Executive Insights, we like to provide you with an opportunity to be challenged in your thinking. As graduate students, we recognize that's important for us as working professionals to always be challenged. So I'd like to introduce you to Greg. Greg Coker is the president and CEO of Greg Coker Development Incorporated, whose mission is the development of the individual, team, and organization. He is considered an expert in human behavior and organizational dynamics. By reading his books and attending his keynotes and workshops, participants are moved to achieve higher levels of performance, and their organizations are better places to work. He is the author of Building Cathedrals, The Power of Purpose, Soft Skills, Field Manual, and Healing the Wounds, Forgiveness and Reconciliation in the Workplace. His fourth book, Pillars of the Organization, is scheduled to be released this year. His clients have included AT&T, General Motors, McDonald's, Vanderbilt University, TVA, Duke Energy, and hundreds of high-performance individuals who benefit from his personal coaching. Thanks again, Greg, for being here. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Kenzie. I'm honored to be here. And I'm a Western Kentucky University graduate, so I'm even more honored. Live here in Bowling Green. I won't bore you with a lot of my background. I will tell you on my website, gregcokerdevelopment.com, you see that on the screen, and I will share this PowerPoint with Kenzie. And Kenzie, you're welcome to send it out to everybody on the call. And you can go on my website. All three of my books are free downloads. So if you have trouble sleeping, then go to my website. And I will tell you this fourth book, Pillars of the Organization. I have the first part, The Quest for Best Version, which is what I'm going to share with you all this afternoon. I have a rough draft of that. And if anybody would be interested in reviewing that rough draft and giving me some feedback on that, then I would be honored for your feedback. This fourth book is different in a way that I'm not working quite in a vacuum like I did with my first three. So I'm taking my time on this one. The Pillars of the Organization is actually an outline of an emerging leader program. I call it an emerging leader experience because it is an experience. We've got 8 states that I do work with now. And out of the 8 states, we do 4 sessions. Each session is 2.5 days. It's over a course of a year, and there are 4 pillars of that experience. Number 1 is networking, because I'm sure the folks on the call can attest that that's an important part of business, is being able to network with your peers. So the first pillar is networking. The second pillar is industry awareness. So we do it in a particular industry, the crushed stone industry. So they enjoy getting to know parts of people and organizations in different parts of the industry. The third pillar is geographic awareness. So we do it here in Kentucky, in addition to the other 7 states. So we do one session in West Kentucky and Paducah. We do one in Pikeville, Louisville, Northern Kentucky. We've done them in Hopkinsville, Bowling Green, et cetera. And then the fourth pillar is my small part, leadership development. And I say it's a small part because it is the smallest part, but it's lightning in a bottle juxtaposition with those other 3. So what I'm doing is the Pillars of the Organization is somewhat of a workbook to this emerging leader experience that I do in 8 states. So what I'm going to share with you tonight is the Quest for Best Version, that first part. But just real quickly, a little bit about my background. I grew up in Franklin, Kentucky, just down the road here, live in Bowling Green now. Went to Western Kentucky University, undergraduate and graduate school. Undergraduate communication, I was just up the hill from you all in the Fine Arts Center. Randy Capps, Dr. Kell, Joe and Jimmy. I have a minor in psychology that was further down the hill from you all. So my undergraduate's in communication psychology. went out in the business world for a little bit, returned to go to graduate school, wrapped up graduate school, went to Washington, D.C. for a couple, 3-4 years, worked up there, started with AT&T, spent 15 years with AT&T, recruited by our governor of Kentucky to be a regulator. After that 4-year stint in government service, I tell folks I was recruited and hired by a great leader and fired by a great manager. And a lot of my work is going around the country literally and helping folks understand it's management and leadership, not or. I was hired by a great leader, emotional intelligence, not the best manager. He was recruited to corporate because they needed a culture guy. And then we got a guy named Kevin, not a bad guy, good guy, great manager, not the best leader. Didn't like my personal style. And one Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, if you're ever going to be fired in corporate America, it's always on a Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock. And one Friday afternoon at 3 o'clock, I get my walking papers. And in retrospect, that was probably the best thing that happened. I'm a lot happier doing what I'm doing now. I was in the unemployment line, and 2 stories come to mind. One, John F. Kennedy, supposedly at NASA, sees 2 people sweeping the floor. First person, he said, "What are you doing?" That guy or gal said, "I'm sweeping the floor." The second person, John F. Kennedy, said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "With all due respect, Mr. President, I'm helping you put a man on the moon." Wow, I always consider myself a man on the moon type person, thanks to all the great faculty and staff at Western Kentucky University and the friends and my family, et cetera. But I'll be honest with you, in the unemployment line, just literally down the street from you all, down on Chestnut Street, I didn't feel like putting a man on the moon. The second story I always heard was a man or lady walking down the street, sees 2 people laying brick. The first one, he said, "What are you doing?" And that guy or gal said, "I'm laying brick." Totally disengaged. The second person, he said, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm building a cathedral." Wow. I mean, at the lowest point in my life, I didn't feel like building a cathedral, didn't think I could. Started doing research on that story. I couldn't get it out of my mind, and asked myself, is it true? It actually is true. That's the genesis of my first book called Building Cathedrals, A Power Purpose, based on a guy named Sir Christopher Wren, who's known in England, one of the greatest architects in history. Sir Christopher Wren was commissioned to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral after the Great Fire of 1666 that leveled London. One day in 1671, Christopher Wren observes 3 bricklayers on a scaffold. Always heard the story of 2. He observed 3 in 1671. The first guy goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm laying brick. I'm a bricklayer." I think he was probably totally disengaged. The second bricklayer, he said, "What do you do?" He goes, "I'm building a wall." I think he was probably happy about that wall. Not sure he saw the big picture. The third bricklayer, the most productive of the 3, the future leader of the group, when Christopher Wren asked the question, "What are you doing?" With a gleam in his eye, he exclaims, "I'm building a cathedral to the Almighty." That story's been told for over 300 years. The most productive people in life, in business, in your communities, in your churches, in your homes, are those of purpose. So I wrote my first book called Building Cathedrals, The Power of Purpose. Excuse me, we're in our 5th printing. I do that keynote speech around the country. Second book is called Soft Skills Field Manual. Actually did that workshop for a group of juniors and seniors at South Warren a couple of weeks ago. You may have seen it featured on Channel 13. I do that program with school systems and colleges and universities and actually companies on the soft skills. I mean, we can teach them the hard technical skills at the Corvette plant, which I work with, or Houchins Industries, or Grace Gilbert Clinic that I do work with locally. But I don't always have the time, or I assume that they're going to learn the soft skills at school or in their other work. And they don't always do that, as you all know. So the second book is called Soft Skills Field Manual. The third book is called Healing the Wounds, Forgiveness and Reconciliation in the Workplace, based on a broken heart. And it was hard for me to forgive the guy that fired me. And a lot of people have written books on forgiveness and reconciliation from a religious point of view, but not very many have written anything about it at work. And I think that's a key organizational dynamic that leaders today are starting to realize, that if we don't have forgiveness and reconciliation, if we're harboring hard feelings and lack of forgiveness, we're probably not going to be the best organization we can be. So those are the 3 books. They're all free downloads on my website. If you want to take a look at that, you can download those. If you want hard copies, I can get you hard copies as well. This next book is called Pillars of the Organization. And as I mentioned earlier, it's based on the emerging leader experience I do across the country. And there are basically 5 pillars and based on my experience. The first pillar is the quest for best version. My theory on the quest for best version is an inside out approach. And I've been, honestly, even the last 5 or 6 years before doing this program, I'd been starting right with leadership. I hadn't really been thinking about asking myself, Greg, how can you be the best version of you? There are two Greg Cokers out there, and I'll tell you a little bit about those later on. I played golf. I'm not sure how many out there are golfers, but there's one golfer that shows up, that plays golf, that's a pretty decent golfer. The other golfer, doesn't show up until the last second, and I go out there and I hack around. And what I find is being intentional can improve my golf game 100%. And that's what I talk about in that quest for best version. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. And again, I'll send you the manuscript if you're interested. At the bottom of this page right here, you've got my website. My email address is ibuildcathedrals@gmail.com, based on that first book, Building Cathedrals of Power Purpose. And you've got my cell phone number down there at the bottom. So feel free to reach out. The second pillar is the appreciation of differences. And I'm not talking about the appreciation of differences of people of color or gender or sexual orientation. There's enough of that, and it's important stuff. I don't mean it to mean it's important in sport. I don't teach that. I teach, and I'm focused on the appreciation of differences as it relates to communication. And I'll share a little bit of driver, analytical, expressive, aimable. We tend to look out of all four windows of the world. Driver, pop, pop, pop. If I'm a professor at Western, and I've taught at Western a little bit, I mean, if the class starts at 5 o'clock tonight, at 4:45, I'm ready to rock and roll. Let's go. Those are great folks to have on a team. You got analyticals. A lot of you all on the call are analytical, especially if you're in the accounting and cybersecurity. If you're getting your MBA, I'm very right brain. I have a master's in communication and psychology. I don't think I could do an MBA. I really couldn't. With the stats, my brain just doesn't work that way. So those are the analyticals. So you've got drivers, pop, pop, pop. You got the analyticals, are a lot more methodical. You've got the expressives, like me, duh. And then you've got the aimables, who are more focused on harmony and other people. Those are four the basic things. I do the Myers-Briggs. You all probably taken the Myers-Briggs as well. Extrovert, introvert, intuitive, sensing, intuitive, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving. I'm a ENTP. So I talk about those. That's what we're talking about, the appreciation of differences. And what I found in corporate America is that there is a lot of prejudice. There's a lot of discrimination against different styles. If I'm not careful, I don't always appreciate that analytical. And if you're that analytical, you may not always appreciate how expressive I am. Or that driver doesn't always appreciate the aimable, and the aimable thinks the driver is a little bit too pushy. So I'm talking about the appreciation of differences as related to communication style. The third pillar is followership, management, and leadership. I've never talked about followership up until the last couple of years ago. We spend more time following than we do managing and leading. Even if you're a high-level VP, and I've been a vice president, and I'm a president of an organization right now, a nonprofit, I spend more time following the direction of the board. President Caboni does a lot of leading and managing, but he spends a lot of time being a follower of the Board of Regents. And if you're a great follower, you're probably a better leader. And I look back of me being fired from corporate America, when you point a finger at somebody else, you got three coming right back at you. And I think about every day of how I probably contributed to my being fired. So we talk about followership. We talk about management a little bit. I don't talk a lot about it because I'm not the best manager. I'm a decent manager. I'm a better leader. So I bring some folks in to talk about that. And then we talk about leadership. Leadership, leadership is action, not position. We're all leaders. The fourth pillar is me, we, team. And me is doing that reflection on the best version. I'm doing some work here locally for a healthcare company that's going through some change. And they've hired me to do some work with their board. And before I'm even talking to the actual board, the team, I'm interviewing individual team members on this quest for best version. Then I'm going to go in and talk to the team in general. So again, I need to think about how I start to be the quest for best version. And then lastly, but not leastly, is organizational dynamics. And those are things like orientation, but guess what? An employee decides in the first 48 hours if he or she is going to stay with that company or not. I'll repeat that. In the first 48 hours, that employee has decided whether they're going to stay with your company or not. And gone are the days where we can just pretty much wham bam, thank you, ma'am or sir. I mean, glad you're here. You're going to do fine. I've got to be in Louisville in a couple hours. If you need anything, Kenzie can take care of you. No, those days are gone. We've got to do a better job orienting our employees. We talk about performance appraisals. I call them poop sandwiches in most companies. Poop sandwiches are pretty much, here's what you're doing good, Greg. But I feel bad about, here's what you're doing good, but I need to talk to you about what you're doing bad. But I feel bad about what I've been talking about doing bad. So I'm going to end on some good. I mean, how many have had a performance appraisal like that? I have. I've actually given some. Here's what you're doing good. I'm going to transition to the bad, but then I'm going to end on the good because I feel bad about talking about the bad. That's called a poop sandwich. And what I'm suggesting from an organizational dynamic standpoint is we need to be more conversational. So that's basically the book tonight or this afternoon. Just real quickly, I want to share some things on the quest for best version. As I mentioned earlier, if you're interested, send me your email or email me at ibuildcathedrals@gmail.com and I'll send you a draft. I'd love to have your feedback on it. So let's talk about the quest for best version very quickly. I'm going to go turbo because Kenzie said stop at 5:45 for some questions. Bottom line, the quest for best version, emotional intelligence. IQ, there's no doubt you've got IQ. What about your emotional intelligence? What happens to the oxygen when you walk in the room? And IQ and EQ equals obviously success. There are 4 components of emotional intelligence. There's self-awareness, how aware of your actions and how they impact other people. Self-management. You watch the Super Bowl. I mean, you saw definitely the grabbing the coach and screaming. That wasn't self-management there. Social awareness. Are you aware of the cliques in your organization? Even at the Gordon Ford School of Business, are you aware of some folks being left out in the lobby area when you're out there talking? Do you bring them in? And then relationship management. If you've got an issue with someone in your organization, you've got to solve it. And that goes back to my third book, Healing the Wounds, Forgiveness and Reconciliation in the Workplace. There's no doubt you've got IQ. What about your EQ? If you've got EQ, you're just looking for more feedback on self-awareness. You're trying to manage your emotions. I try to manage my emotions. I'm pretty expressive, but under stress, I can attack. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. Social awareness. Am I including other people in my conversation, in my team? And then relationship management. Career trajectory. I love sharing this model right here with smart people like you guys. Because what it basically says is that to get ahead in an organization, I've worked for 4 Fortune 500 companies, and I can attest to this is dead on. There are 3 things that are going to get you ahead once you start. If you're not employed now, if you're in graduate school full time, if you're employed now and you're going to graduate school, that's great. A lot of you are out there. These are the 3 variables right here: performance, image, and exposure. What it says is performance is only 10%. Now, I don't mean to demean performance. That gets you in the door. That gets you hired as an accountant. That gets you hired as a leadership consultant, like gets me hired. Okay, but that's the price of admission, Greg. Once you start with my company at AT&T, which I work for AT&T, is leadership development. That's great, Greg. I'm glad you've got an undergraduate master's degree. But bottom line, that's not going to always get you ahead. We expect great performance. Image. How do you present yourself? And it's not big hat, no cattle. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how you present yourself, how you speak, that image you have, and then exposure, 60%. Because if you work at Western Kentucky University, and Kenzie can tell you, because I see her out there in the community, that's great. But what's going to get you ahead in your organization are these extracurricular activities. If you join a trade association, if you go to the chamber after hours. My son, Will Coker, owns Will Coker State Farm, just opened it up in South Warren, right over there where Kenzie is. And I'm so proud of him. He joined the Chamber of Commerce, $400 to join the Bowling Green Area Chamber of Commerce, the best $400 you'll ever spend. Because Will not only had a ribbon cutting at his place a couple, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he's been going to the chamber breakfast last Friday at 7 a.m., brought his employees out there. That's going to do more for my son's success. Performance, he's a good insurance person, but that image, the way he presents himself, but also that exposure out there. What about engagement? Gallup does a poll every year on employee engagement for like the past 20 years. It says that 26% based on this annual poll are fully engaged. 55% are partially engaged. 19% are totally disengaged. And I'm not suggesting we label people, But right now, if you could put 26, 55, and 19 across a sheet of paper, and you put every one of your employees or all your coworkers down the left-hand side, could you label every one of them? Sure you could. Not fair, but if you want fair, go to Carnival. I mean, in organizations, you get labeled all the time. I've played all three roles. I've been the 26% where I've been fully engaged. I've been 55% where I've been partially engaged. I've been in the 19% where I've been totally disengaged. But that's the power of the rebrand. After the pandemic, I think we all went from maybe 26, 55, 19. But guess what? The beauty of this is we can rebrand. Now, I say in general, because Gallup does this with employees. I think it relates to our churches. 26% are fully engaged in our churches. They come to church every Sunday. They don't complain about the minister. 55% very often are like my families. We sort of go, we sort of hang out. And then 19% are totally disengaged. In prisons, I do this same program in the prison systems. Every inmate in Kentucky that goes through my leadership workshops get 30 days off their sentence. 26% of the inmates out there. I've talked to wardens, 26%. 26%, they ain't coming back. They've done their time. They've learned it. They're taking all these classes in prison. When they get out, their workforce development, boom, no recidivist. They're not coming back to prison. 55%, I talked to the warden. He goes, Greg, that's about right. 55%, sort of the roll of the dice. I'm not sure. 19%, he said, I guarantee give them about 6 months or less, they'll be back. So 26, 55, 19. But the key for the quest for best version, I've got to stay in the 26%. Yes, face. There's an old story of Thomas Jefferson riding cross country on horseback, comes across a swollen river. The bridge has been washed out. There's a guy on the river's bank, needs to ride across the river. He looks at 20 or 30 people. Thomas Jefferson is modern day Secret Service. Looks around. He goes right to Thomas Jefferson. He said, excuse me, sir, can I have right across the river? Thomas Jefferson said, yeah, hop on the horse. So he hops on the horse, goes across the river, jumps off the horse. Thomas Jefferson trots off. The modern day Secret Service scolds that guy. How dare you? You could have asked any of us right across the river. You asked the president of the United States. You know what he said? First of all, I didn't know he's president. Second of all, some people in life have a no face. Some people have a yes face. I asked the yes face. So in the quest for best version, I'm looking at Kenzie's picture up here. I'm looking at you right now, but you couldn't have a better person than Kenzie at the School of Business. When I walk in to Grice Hall there, who do I see? I see Kenzie. I see Dr. Henson. I see Nolan McCord. I see Dean Thrasher. Those folks out there are saying, come on in. You're gonna love this place. But what I find very often is when you go to doctor's offices sometimes, you go to other places, where do we put the yes faces? In the back somewhere, we put the no faces up front. So the key question, do you have a yes face that when you're going out there interviewing or you're looking for that promotion that says, put me in, coach, put me in? What about your golden circle? Here's your homework assignment. Google Simon Sinek, The Golden Circle. Start with Why. It's a great book called Start with Why. It's the #2 most downloadable TED Talk in the history of TED Talks. All you got to do is Google Simon Sinek, Start with Why. It's 18 minutes. You can listen to it on the way home tonight. What it basically says is most folks start with what? What do you do, Greg? Well, I'm a trainer. I'm a speaker. I write some books. Okay, that's not very exciting. How do you do it? Well, I got some books. I do some podcasts. I do this. Why do you do it? Why do you do it, Greg? Well, why do I do it is if I can do a workshop and one person leaves this workshop and is a better husband, a better wife, a better boyfriend, girlfriend, a mother, father, whatever, if they're a better person, if they're that best version of themselves, I've done my job. That's my why. Well, guess what? Simon Sinek talks about people will give you their blood, sweat, and tears for your why, not for your what. Martin Luther King, I have a dream. Didn't say he had a plan. He had a great plan, but people gave their blood. They still give their blood, sweat, and tears for his why. The Wright brothers, their why was commercial aviation so I can go see my daughter get married a couple 4 years ago in Sanibel, Florida. That was their why, where the other folks were more interested in becoming famous. The what? People will not give you their blood, sweat, and tears for your what. Maybe not for your how, but for your why. So what's your personal why? What's your why? What's your purpose? The next thing is about understanding, appreciating, and maximizing differences. I talked about that earlier. They're basically 4 windows of the world we look at. Now, I know you've done DISC, and there's a lot of great personality profiles out there. I do Myers-Briggs. There's a lot of them out there, the Enneagram, and there's tons of them. They're all great. I like this one the best because it's just so easy to understand and to be able to deliver. Drivers, analyticals, expressive, angels. And you can take a look at the top. There's task focus. At the bottom, there's people. And then on the left-hand side, there's ask directed and tell directed on the right-hand side. Well, you look at task and tell, those are the drivers, pop, 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 great folks to have on a team. You got the task and ask, that's more analytical, great folks to have on a team. You got tell and people like me, that's expressive, great folks to have on a team. Then you've got people and ask, those are the aimables, great folks to have on a team. And we tend to look out of all four of those windows, but we typically look out of one or two more than the other two. I'm more expressive driver. My wife, Nikki's more amiable analytical, opposite attract in marriages. But in the workplace, very often, they don't. We want to hire people just like us. There's nothing wrong with hiring people just like us. But if I'm putting a team together, I don't want all analyticals. Now, you'll never get anything done. I don't want all drivers who'll beat each other up. I don't want all expressives. We're all fighting for attention. And I don't want all aimables because we're like, well, what do you want to do? I don't care. What do you want to do? So you need all four of them. But what happens under stress? And we're all stressed out there. What it says under stress, and that's the red part. Under stress, the drivers become autocratic. They go from let's go to come on, let's go. I mean, whoa. Analyticals withdraw. They take their ball and go home. They retreat. They go to their office and hide out. Expressives like me, I got so much energy going on. When I get mad, I lunge verbally. I'll attack. And then the aimables under stress, guess what they do? They acquiesce. They give in. They say yes when they really mean no. And I take this on a step further. If we had more time this afternoon, I'd love to come back, Kenzie, another time, and we can actually take this model a little bit step further. But on the quest for best version, I cover social styles. We also cover the Myers-Briggs. What about happiness out there? Arthur Brooks. Google Arthur Brooks. The dude is amazing. Simon Sinek, amazing. Brené Brown, amazing. There's so many great authors and motivational speakers out there. But happiness, what it says about happiness on our quest for best version is happiness, you can't be happy. So stop trying to be happy. What he says, you can be happier. You know, and he and Oprah Winfrey wrote this book together on happiness. Wonderful. Happiness is not a destination, it's a direction. We can't ever be totally happy. We can be happier. How do I do that? And our circumstances don't have to keep us stuck in unhappiness. I mean, we're all going through stress out there. And most folks will say their purpose derived from a bad situation. I got fired from corporate America. Had I not been fired, which is horrible, I went from making darn good money to making no money. You know, there's a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Pick that up. That's an old book. Oh my gosh, it's a great book. But Viktor Frankl, he got his meaning of life from being in a Nazi concentration camp for 6.5 years. So we can be happier. We can never be happy. In social media, there's a lot of other things. I won't even get into what are keeping these younger people unhappy. But let's talk about what Arthur Brooks says basically are the 4 pillars of happiness. And in my normal PowerPoint, I've got about 8 or 10 slides on happiness, but I've distilled it this afternoon. Faith, family, friends, and work. All research-based. Faith, not necessarily a specific religion, but rather having a transcendent view and approach to life, something bigger than ourselves. Supposedly Roosevelt, when he was president, had a bunch of world leaders having dinner at the White House one night. Before they had their dessert, he said, let's go outside real quick. They went outside. He said, let's take a look up in the air. He said, let's look at all the stars. And Teddy Roosevelt knew a lot about astronomy. He started pointing out different equations out there in about 5 minutes. And he said, okay, now that we're overwhelmed and we feel small, let's go back inside and start to work. It's that awe. And we have to have that awe based on research. Family. I don't have to explain that. I mean, we moved back to Bowling Green 5 years ago because my son and his wife are here. We've got 2 grandkids now. My daughter, Abby and Chris, live just down the street here. They're expecting their first child, our 3rd grandson, our granddaughter in June. I mean, family keeps people happy. Friends, real friends, not just deal friends. And Arthur Brooks talks about there's real friends and deal friends. You know, deal friends I got a lot of deal friends with the Chamber of Commerce and people I do work. What about my real friends? I got a book club that we started, and there's 12 of us. Those 11 folks, Terry Daniels, Alex Downing, I go Phil Neal. We go through a bunch of, those folks, Jim DeSazery, I can name all 11. They're my real friends. I love those guys. Friendship accounts for almost 60% of the difference between happiness and unhappiness. And then lastly but not leastly, work, our toil to earn our daily bread. and I'm not being political, but we start paying people to stay at home, there's something wrong with that. It's not Democrat or Republican. I'm a social scientist, but people want to work. You take away a man or woman's dignity, and they're not ever going to be happy there. Loneliness is a crisis out there. That's the quest for best version, and women are better at it than men. Women keep their friends. Men don't always do that. That's why I started this book club, because I needed real friends. We're all lonely. I need to be less lonely. The feeling that there's a gap between those connections, loneliness experience is something missing. It's a big part of research right now in leadership and in organizations is loneliness is a big deal. Lonely people experience as much as 30% greater risk of dying earlier than they otherwise would. The equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, a 2-pack of habit a day is equivalent to being lonely. The deaths of despair, the suicide, drug overdoses, etc. Psychologists have identified loneliness as one of the 7 cognitive indicators of despair, along with low self-esteem, feeling sorry for yourself, and feeling worried, hopeless, helpless, and unloved. Loneliness won't just make you miserable, it'll kill you. And why am I talking about this to a group of leaders in business? Because guess what? Managers don't think about this. I love managers. There's managers and leaders. We're both of them. Managers are probably more managing the numbers, and we wouldn't lead if it wasn't for managers. We wouldn't have anything to lead on. So I love management. But the leaders of the world are out there, and you're a manager and a leader and a follower, all 3 of them. But the leadership in you sitting there going, we've got to get out and get our folks. Let's do something after work. Let's go to White Squirrel and have some drinks. Let's go throw some battle axes. Let's do something fun, because loneliness is a crisis in our companies right now. The warning light, just like we have one in our car, and I've got one on my Avalon out there that says, check engines or our service is due here in the next couple of weeks. Guess what? The flashing warning light on our dashboard, our mental dashboard, is telling us that guess what? We need to take care of ourselves. So we're almost closing up here. I want to 2 dramatically different people, multipliers and diminishers. Great book by Liz Wiseman called Multipliers. Leaders are readers. If you're not reading at least 1 book a month, you're not doing yourself a service. Leaders are readers. And I know you've got a lot to read academically, but when you finish up your program or whatever, I read 4 or 5 books a month, because that's what I do for a living. But if you're not reading at least 1 book a month in leadership to make you a better person, diminishers, these folks drain intelligence, energy, capability from the people around them, and they always need to be the smartest people in the room. These are the idea killers, the energy sappers, the diminishers of talent commitment. How many out there can visualize someone like that in your workplace, either now or in the past? We all have. Then you've got multipliers like everybody on this call right now. On the other side of the spectrum, these are the people who use their intelligence. You'll never know they're the smartest people in the room to amplify the smarts of other people. That's that professor out there that when you walk in the room, you will never know how darn smart she is or how darn smart he is, because guess what? He makes you feel smarter. What a multiplier. When these folks walk in the room, light bulbs start to go off other people's heads. Ideas flow, problems get solved. These are the people who inspire others to stretch themselves and to deliver results. But guess what? If we're not careful, we can be an accidental diminisher. Ooh, that hurts, because I'm a multiplier like you guys. But if I'm not careful, sometimes I fail to understand the restrictive impact I have, because I've grown up in AT&T and other places, and I've been praised for being, maybe a smart manager and an accountant or whatever. And I've moved up the ranks because of my acumen and my IQ. Be careful, because very often, if you're not careful, that's called hubris. That's called what my mom and dad were country people. And frankly, they know what hubris was. I didn't know what hubris was until probably 8 or 9 years ago, but it's basically getting too big for your britches. We can have those accidental diminishers. Marshall Goldsmith, a good friend of mine in La Jolla, California, he's actually a Kentuckian. Wall Street Journal rated Marshall Goldsmith the #1 executive coach in the world, in the whole country. What he said, Greg, you don't need to be telling your folks what to do as much as you need to be telling them what to stop doing. Whoa. What's your to stop list? In that first pillar of my book, I talk about the quest for best version, and I share some things that Marshall Goldsmith shares with us. This is Peter Drucker, known as the father of modern management. Exactly what Marshall Goldsmith stole from him, he gave me. I'm stealing right now from Marshall and Peter Drucker. bottom line, we don't need to be telling people what to do necessarily as much as we need to be helping our direct reports understand what they need to stop doing. Well, guess what? We're not talking about flaws of skill nor flaws of intelligence. You're smart people. What we're talking about are those challenges of interpersonal behavior, often leadership behavior. And the higher you move up in your company, the more technical expertise you have. There's no doubt you've got the IQ, but the more likely your problems that you might experience. I do a lot of executive coaching. It's more behavioral. I got a guy at Vanderbilt that I do executive coaching with. I got a CEO of a healthcare company and a couple, 2 or 3 more. They're scary bright, but guess what? I need to help them understand what they need to back off on. Their problems are more emotional intelligence versus IQ, because I can't help them with IQ. To stop list. This is from Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Will Not Get You Where You Necessarily Want to Go. A great book. Here's a couple that he gives us 20. I'm only going to give you a couple of them. Adding 2 cents, still in ownership. How many have done that? And Marshall told me one day, he said, Greg, the problem with smart people is they add their 2 cents worth. They try to add value. When somebody walks into your office and says, man, I got this great idea. And you're like, okay, tell me this great idea. And they tell you, my son Will, he owns State Farm, Will Coker State Farm. He called me, he said, Dad, I got this great idea, maybe how to market my business. And I'll listen to him. And instead of just shutting up and saying, Will, that's a great idea. What help do you need from me? You know what I do? I'm like, Will, that's a great idea, but you need to call Kenzie Jessup. Kenzie can help you. And you need to make sure you get with Western. And all of a sudden I can just see him crestfallen. So I may have given him a little bit of value, but I stole a lot of energy and I stole a lot of his ownership. Snarky comments. I play golf with a guy. He's an attorney, scary, bright guy. I love him. I mean, he and I are really close friends, but a lot of my friends, they'll say, if he's playing today, Greg, I don't want to play with him because and I won't even say what he's a smart, he's so quick. He's a so bright guy, but he's always thinking, but sometimes he's snarky. I understand him, but guess what? In organization, sometimes that sort of snarky person needs to back off a little bit. Using the word but. They did a definition of but on an online dictionary, and the definition they finally came up with after trying to find one for days, disregard all previous information. Whoa. So when someone says something and saying but, you may just want to end it with a sentence and saying it's a great idea. Or you don't say it's a great idea if you don't think it's a great idea, but in the sentence and say, would you be open for some feedback? Or have we thought about doing something like that? But very, very crucial. Speaking, emailing when angry. How many have done that? I've done it. And what he talks about, Arthur Brooks talks about in the book about happiness, he says, what we need to do is when you get angry, when you go from a driver autocratic or when I go from expressive to attack, what happens is my emotions are in my limbic part of my brain. And how many had grandparents that said you need to think about something for 15 seconds before you open your mouth? Well, what she was basically saying, or he was basically saying, is it goes from your limbic to the prefrontal cortex. It takes 30 seconds based on research. Abraham Lincoln, in Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg, you had Robert E. Lee and you had not McClellan. I can never think about that guy's name. He was a general. Anyway, whoever the general was, he let Robert E. Lee go. He let him escape. And Abraham Lincoln wrote this scathing letter after Gettysburg and said, I can't imagine why you did that. And he read it and then he threw it away. And then he started talking to some of the other generals around, the other captains, and he said, well, here's why that he did what he did. And Meade, George Meade. So he said, here's why General Meade did that. And then Abraham Lincoln goes back and writes another letter and sends that letter instead. So basically what he did is he went from limbic to prefrontal cortex. And very often we need to back off before. And I've done every one of these. But guess what? You've probably done every one of these, but we don't do them in groups. We don't do them on a regular basis or you wouldn't be where you are. Failure to give recognition. We don't always give recognition to people. Playing favorites. Who's the last person to know they're the teacher's pet? The teacher. Because everybody else sitting there going, but they don't realize they build rapport with that particular person. We've got to be careful in corporate America also that we're not just hanging out with Kenzie or just Greg because, these are good people. Well, that's awesome. But you may be spending a little bit too much time with just Greg over here, not listening. Listening is tough. I'm a better listener at 59 years old than I was at 39, but it is a tough thing to do. Failure to express gratitude. We'll be able to thank people. I'm not a religious presentation, but I try to get on my hands and knees every night before I go to bed and when I wake up and be grateful for living in Bowling Green, Kentucky and going to Western Kentucky University. conversational narcissism. Ooh, never heard of this one before. Up until the pandemic, I started doing research. What it basically says is that when you tell me you went on a trip to Florida, instead of just letting you bake in the Florida memory, no pun intended, I'll say, well, where'd you go to Florida? We went to Destin. Oh, I've been to Destin. Did you go to Donut Hole? I just need to be quiet and let you talk. Or when I go to a funeral and my friend's father passed away, instead of just holding his hand and saying, I'm sorry. Well, I lost my father 15 years ago, and I'll tell you what, I understand it. How many have done that? We've all done that. It comes from a noble place very often. Failure to express regret or apologize. Again, men are not always best at doing this. Withholding information. A partner of mine in a lobbying firm is a former state senator. Love him to death. But he's a former state senator. And his mantra is always loose lips sink ships, so he never talks about things. Well, sometimes he didn't tell me information I need to know. So failure to release that. In closing, this is Clayton Christensen. Clayton Christensen, a great book called The Innovator's Dilemma for space business big time. It talks about your competition will not attack you always from the top. They come from the bottom. Dollar General and Walmart. Dollar General is kicking butt and taking names. How many Dollar Generals are there in Warren County? Like 37 or so? They're popping up one everywhere. Well, Walmart was never paying attention to Dollar General 15, 20 years ago. And that's what Clayton Christian talks about in Innovator's Dilemma is you got to watch the competition coming from the bottom. They'll start pecking off your small parts of your business before you know it, they've overtaken. And that's that book, Innovator's Dilemma. He also wrote a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? But here's something profound. He passed away a couple, 4 or 5 years ago. But on the last day of his class, he asked his students, there's my alarm clock, making sure I stop here in a couple seconds, let you all ask questions. But on the last day of his class, he would ask his students to take the business theoretical lenses on themselves. All these great things you've learned at Gordon Ford School of Business from accounting and cyber security and all these other great things, MBA, take those models that you use for business and use them on yourself. And 3 questions, and that's what I'm going to end tonight. 3 questions he asked his MBA or asked him, because he's passed away now, he asked these 3 questions. Number 1, how can I be sure that I'll be happy in my career? Number 2, how can I be sure that my relationships with my spouse and my family become an enduring source of happiness? Number 3, and you may laugh at number 3, how can I be sure I'll stay out of jail? But before you laugh, I'm 59 years old. I know a lot of my friends have gone through divorces because if they would only spend more time on their family like they did their business. And number 3, I've got 2 fraternity brothers that have spent time in jail, insider trading and embezzlement. And I've got another client that spent time in jail as well. So those are 3 things at the end of his MBA program at Harvard, just like at Gordon Ford, 2 great schools. Take all this business stuff you've been doing and ask these 3 questions from a quest for best version. So in closing, 212 degrees of personal peak performance. At 211 degrees, water's hot. At 212 degrees, it boils. And with boiling water comes steam. And with steam, you can power a train. You can produce energy for the world. 1 extra degree makes all the difference in our quest for best version. Thank you for hanging in there with me. I'm going to open it up now, Kenzie, for questions, comments. I'm here as long as you all want to stay. I'll send Kenzie the PowerPoint, and you've got my email and my website. Email me, and I'll send you a draft. I love your feedback on it. So, Kenzie, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Greg. You have always been referred to, I think, around Bowling Green as like the soft skills king. So to hear some of those things, I could really identify and say, oh, maybe I've been a little narcissistic in some of the, in some of my communications. I think we're all guilty of these things. But I do want to open the floor to our participants. Ask a question, give feedback, however you feel that you want to share right now. But let's open the floor for some dialogue and see what you all are thinking, or if there were any key takeaway points that you guys could comment on.
You all learn more from each other than you learn from me, and I just teed some things up. So please, what grabs your attention? If you're talking to your husband or your wife, your son or daughter, significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever, and they said, "What'd you do for the last hour?" What's that one thing maybe that you went, that made me think a little bit?
And you guys can unmute and just kind of discuss. So Darius, I see that you've unmuted. Go ahead and feel
Yeah.
free.
Hey, how's it going today, sir? So one question is, and it's more of, I guess, an observation for yourself. Have you noticed that with the change in the way society is, we're a lot more fast paced, a lot more technology, a lot more distractions. Has that affected how you're able to deal with and manage employees or coworkers?
It's big time. The pandemic changed everything. I mean, I wouldn't wish the pandemic, or no one would, on their worst enemy, number one. Number two, so much good came out of the pandemic from a business perspective. I'm a lot more laid back. I used to freak out on Zoom calls. Not that we ever did Zoom calls, because at AT&T we spent $1 million on distance learning. Nobody ever used it. But a pandemic, boom, that's it. We're all doing Zoom, whatever, and we got sort of zoomed out. But people just chilled out. I mean, if my grandson or granddaughter walked in here right now and screamed, or somebody rang the doorbell and the dog started freaking out, whatever. I mean, chill out. I mean, so we've laid back. Employees own everything now. I mean, and I know there's a lot of organizations out there that can't. I mean, Daniel Pink in the book Drive, and he wrote this book before the pandemic. Motivation 1.0, carrot and sticks. I don't know if it worked with my parents 50 years ago in a factory. It doesn't work today. Motivation 2.0, and again, he wrote this before the pandemic, but he's dead on after the pandemic. 3 things that motivate our employees. Number 1 is autonomy. Our employees now more than ever want to be autonomous. Now, if you work in a situation where, I got to have all my employees here, fine. Let them determine their work schedule. Let them be autonomous. We think because I'm supervisor, because my boss did it that way. Well, if you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got. So employees want to be autonomous. Number 2 is they want mastery. They want opportunities like this. So if we're not giving the frontline bus drivers and cafeteria workers opportunities to learn like you guys are learning tonight, we're missing the boat. They want autonomy. They want mastery. People want to be the best they can be. And number 3 is they want purpose. And especially the younger people coming the generation, they want to make sure that you're involved with the chamber, that you're with United Way, that you're helping those poor kids down there in that neighborhood, that you're giving me time, opportunity to volunteer, etc. So everything's changed. I mean, the employees are sitting there going, I'm not going to, no. So you basically told me I got to get my butt in Bowling Green, out of Bowling Green, drive to freaking Nashville, which is a horrible, traffic's freaking horrible in Nashville now. And I go down there, 5 days a week, and I drive back and I'm mad at the world because of the traffic. When I can do my work here for 3 days a week or 2 or 1 day a week, those are things. So a long answer to your question, everything's changed. And I think 90% of it, how do you know if you can trust somebody? Trust them. How do you know if you can trust somebody? If you give them a little bit of rope, you'll know if you can trust them. And 90% of the people I work with, they said, I didn't have to worry about my employees not working enough. I had to turn them off. They work too hard. And that's a big issue right there. So thank you for a great question. Great question.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you. Other thoughts or anything that grabbed your attention?
Hi, my name's Clint Osborne. Thanks
Clint.
for this time. You say a lot of motivational things and probably do that all day long over and over. To kind of go along with that prior question, so we've moved into this AI Zoom lifestyle of technical. So I do data analytics, and I'm definitely kind of the person that might not have that yes face, or I'm the guy that's going to say no. That's just, I did the numbers and no. So I had that difficult time sometimes on those poop sandwich evaluations, that come at me, and I just want to state the facts, and I have to really struggle to develop those soft skills. But as we live in this world, we ain't leaving it. We're here. The more that I am getting pressure to get these certifications, get more into the coding and the more analytical, more screen, my face in the screen. But I'm not getting all this extra time to go to the chamber. I got to have that balance, and I know that I got to do these priorities and engaging ways of life. I guess I'm just trying to figure it out. I think that Zoom can beat email, but at the same time, I guess my question to you is, how do I try to make it all happen when there's just limited time? And even though I try to prioritize, it just seems like, okay, I still got to get the better coding down. I still got to get, that better math model that's going to get the right answer. And I still got to present it in a way that's not just, sorry, no, that's not going to work. So any tips there rather than just.
Well, Clint, first, thank you. I mean, Brené Brown, I think you pronounce her name Brené Brown or Brene Brown or whatever. She's a rock star. And you can Google Brené Brown. She talks about being vulnerable. And what you just demonstrated is vulnerability of saying, here's who I am. That's the way my brain works. That's what I do. That's awesome. If my boss that fired me and he was that INTJ, he was that analytical, if he just said, listen, Greg, I'm not going to love on you every morning. That's just not my style. I know you need loving on. That's not my style, buddy. And it's not anything personal with you. That's the way I work. That's great. Tell me that. I mean, so I love the honesty of just on the Zoom. I love Zoom. But I've got a client here in town that I'm doing a lot of work with now, healthcare company. And we've met every Friday for the past 5 Fridays at White Squirrel for a beer. And he's the CEO of the whole company. And I only say that is because we do some Zoom things or whatever. And so Zoom's wonderful if you're doing the coding. And I tell folks I spoke at the South Warren School, and I'm like, you got to get out. But, if you're a rocket scientist or you're curing cancer, soft skills are good. But if you're a coder and you're doing all you can do and you can't get out there and do the chamber, these are generalizations that I make. But I will tell you that coders that I work with and really extreme engineers, I work with a lot of engineers, they still have the same need of saying, guys, let's go to White Squirrel this afternoon. Or if I'm a leader, the manager in me sitting there going, oh, hell no. I mean, we're not, it's 1 o'clock on a Wednesday. We got to freaking work. But the leader in me goes, if we go and throw battle axes this afternoon, maybe have one beer, not more than one or whatever, I got to manage it or whatever. But if we do that time invested, we'll make it up in 15 days. So that's the leader. The manager wants to see, look at the clock. The leader's like, let's go do something fun, because that's going to be a lot more. But the self-awareness, Clint, just for you to be able to understand, it's just what I'm struggling with right now. And it's a good struggle. So thanks for that question. And I don't know if I helped anything, but just be real. And you are real with that. And I appreciate that.
Clint, one of the things that I found, and I get this question a lot from graduate students because we're all kind of in the same season of life. Some of us have kids, some of us have just finished a degree, and we're on the upward track when it comes to climbing that ladder or just kind of filling things out in our current positions. What I usually advise students to do is pick one thing that you're really passionate about and figure out how you can serve small. I am on the board for a family enrichment center, which is a board that works to prevent child abuse. It's something I became really passionate about because I've got little ones. Hold on just a second, please. Thank you.
Who's that? Your kid over there?
Yeah. I got little Chloe over here.
Chloe. Hey, Chloe.
But pick one thing, and if you can just show up a little bit, it makes a huge difference. I'm not able to go to every board meeting. I'm not able to go to every chamber meeting, but when I show up, I make sure that I give it my all, and they know that I'm someone that they can depend on. And so even if it's not, something you can do monthly, if you say, hey, I can do that board meeting during my lunch hour via Zoom. I can't be there in person. It's okay, because they still need your input. But I think choosing something that you're passionate about, one thing, and even if it's small, you can make a huge difference in that. So that's my 2 pieces in there.
No, that's awesome. You're dead on. And if you're in an office, from a happiness perspective, and also from a flow perspective, there's some great research by McHolly Csikszentmihalyi on the flow state. Athletes call it in the zone, jazz musicians call it in the pocket. But there's 4 steps to it. There's the struggle, there's the release, there's flow, there's the recovery. And the struggle is, if I had a rubber band in my hand, I've got a rubber band back here. If I have a rubber band, I got rubber bands right here. The flow happens when there's creative tension. If it's too loose, you're bored. If it's too tight, it's a heart attack waiting to happen. That's that struggle, the creative tension. Then there's the release. Then there's the flow. But the flow will never happen unless you release. I mean, last night, literally in a hotel room in Frankfort, Kentucky, I have an idea on this book, and I text myself at 10:45 because I was getting ready to go to sleep, and all of a sudden, so if you don't take a nap or if you don't go out for a walk, then very often those ideas don't pop. But what we do is we just force ourselves to work harder, and the harder we do, the worse we do, the harder we try, the worse it's a vicious cycle. But I go back to Clint's part right there is sometimes, well, yeah, I can't go out and go to the chamber, but I just need to get out of the house or get out of my office and go walk down the block a little bit, because the manager says, why is he walking around the block for an hour? The leader goes, because that's where Clint's thinking that idea. I know he's stuck, and he's out there right now trying to walk, and he's starting that again, struggle, release, flow. And then once all these endorphins are going on in your head in the flow state, then you'll have a flow hangover, because all those endorphins have been used up and your body's trying to replenish them. Athletes call it in the zone. Jazz musicians, Huey Lewis said sometimes the music just plays itself. Well, in business, what I'm doing is I'm working with a lot of organizations on how do you get in the flow state? Well, very often it's our environment. Why do you think people go to Starbucks? Freaking coffee's $10. I mean, I got coffee down the hall here. Well, because guess what? It smells good. There's music. I go to Rafferty's. That's my flow state. Well, guess what? My office is now my office. That desk is no longer, it's my kitchen table. I moved my kitchen table in my office because I get more in flow on this kitchen table than I did on my traditional office, as my dogs are charging in my office right now. So there's the flow. How do you get out? But Kenzie, you're dead on, choose something. People look for their purpose, like it's going to drop out of the sky on them. Find them what you're passionate about. Sometimes your passion finds you, your purpose, that why finds you. Other thoughts, comments, or questions?
We've got time for about one more. We don't want to hold you all night. We've got a few more minutes. If anybody has one more just thought that's really profound that stuck out to them.
Well, I got them all night long, but short time. So as you're out there, kind of in the very center of it all, right at the leader of leaders, and you're talking to them, and you're inspiring and doing what you do. What do you see as this next frontier? Something new that's kind of like everybody's talking about, or that's like you see it coming, but maybe people can't even quite put it into words yet, or what's out there that maybe you could tip us off on?
Well, I think you're probably a better person to respond to that on AI, the technical parts of it. But the AI is not as spooky. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, it's going to take over. We're always going to need people, and that love in the workplace. I think managers and leaders are lighting up a lot. Gallup did a poll and said if there was one thing that you could do to move the needle on your corporate culture, what would that be? And they did all this research, and what they found was one thing is if you could have one meaningful conversation with each direct report once a week. Now, if you got 400, and I've got a friend of mine that's got 403 employees directly. I said, no, Eddie, he owns his bit. I said, Eddie, you're the CEO. You got 6 direct reports. So one meaningful conversation with all 6 of each individual once a week. And Gallup basically said a meaningful conversation is probably about 12 minutes long. Now, you don't want to go look at your watch going, okay, I'm here, Greg, let's talk. No, but you don't want to stay you don't want to just walk in there like superficial going, how are you doing, Greg? You doing okay? How's your family? No, you need to go in there and have a real conversation, but it shouldn't be so long where Greg's kicking you out of the office. Like, I got work to do, dude. So one meaningful conversation with each employee once a week. And it could be on the phone. It could be calling saying, Clint, dude, how's it going, man? How's your family? What'd y'all do this weekend? And really, because followers want 4 things. Based on research, followers want 4 things. They want, number 1, trust. Number 2 is they want compassion. Number 3 is they want stability. Number 4 is they want hope. And I think from a presidential standpoint, I don't think Biden or Trump, either one, are doing either one of that, or doing these. And I have a friend that was up for the commissioner of education here in Kentucky. He didn't get it. And now he goes, it was the best thing that ever happened. I said, Jim, it probably was. But I was giving him some coaching when he was interviewing for this big time job in Kentucky, the commissioner of education. And I said, Jim, you need to make sure those folks that you're this entourage that's interviewing you, you need to make sure you do trust. You know, in this bridge collapse in Baltimore last night, then as a leader of I want to make sure that, hey, listen, I want to make sure you can trust our decisions on this. Number two is I want to make sure that I'm compassionate, that I'm praying for those families and trying to get it. Number three is stability. We're not looting, our hair's not on fire. We're going to keep it together. And then number four is hope. Because they asked Winston Churchill, what's that one thing that helped you against the Nazis? And he goes, it's what England always had. It's always, we got hope. You know, we're going to get them on the beaches of Normandy. We're going to get them there. So I would say those four things. But I'm really starting to see, Clint, leaders and managers of organizations dealing with happiness and realizing that people out there are suffering from not being overly happy. Loneliness is a huge issue. So I'm starting to see organizations really having to deal after the pandemic with more of the soft things that they didn't have to always deal with in the past. So I don't help you on the technical because the AI, there's so many technical things, but on the psychological things, a lot about what I've talked about in this quest for best version, I think leaders are really, I'm hearing them asking me, Greg, read some books for me, give me a report. What do I need to be thinking about? Because they're not always the best at it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in for this this episode of Executive Insights. Greg, thank you so much for your insights. And thank you for your partnership with Gordon Ford College of Business. This will be posted to our Executive Insights portal on our website. You can access that by using your username and password for WKU. And if you all have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email or via phone. Thank you again. You all have a great night.
Thank you all.